So welcome back to our second and with this final panel for today, how to drive sustainable transformation. Key takeaways from a multi-level perspective. I think the title says it already. We have heard from a lot of different perspectives today, and we will also hear from a lot of different perspectives in the upcoming session. And we want to look back a bit on how has this event, how has this day been so far? How radical have we dared to be? But we also want to look at the perspectives that our speakers can bring in and see what it is that we can take away from their respective fields. So again, it's my great pleasure to welcome three speakers. I have with me Markus Urban-Hubler. He has spent the last 15 years with VERBUND and is now their sustainability manager. VERBUND is Austria's leading utility and one of the largest producers of hydroelectricity in Europe. Around 97% of VERBUND's electricity actually come from hydropower, wind and solar power. And they own some 130 hydropower plants and 6 wind farms. So the SDG number 7, which is clean and affordable energy, is very much at the core mission of VERBUND. Also, VERBUND is the premium sponsor for the Climate Care Biennale of the MAC, as we had already Christoph Thun-Hohenstein with us today. So thank you, Markus, for being with us.
Good afternoon.
The second speaker that I'm happy to announce is Fady Abdelmalek. He's the Field Operation Innovation Manager at StatsPerform, a company that creates digital solutions. Before this, he has worked in the Student Association on the issue of integration between the East and the West. And he said that in his own student association, as well as in the corporate life, he had the impression that it's sometimes decisions are more made based on gut feeling than actually data, which is why he got very interested in the world of data science. Fady describes himself as a geek and gadget freak at heart, but he also has a deep interest in sustainability. And he's currently working on his MBA at the Vienna University of Economics and Business Executive Academy. Hello, Fady, good to have you with us.
Hi, Catherine, thanks for having me.
And the third speaker that I'm happy to announce is Alice Schmidt. Alice is a business consultant and author with a big focus also on global sustainability and social impact. Alice comes from an economic background as well. She studied at the Vienna University of Economics and Business as well, but she then soon turned more towards advocacy and consulting and works with institutions like the UN, with governments, or with the European Commission. She's also an MIT climate ambassador, and for the past 10 years, she's been teaching a course on sustainable business and management at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. And just recently, actually, I think just a few weeks ago, Alice's new book, The Sustainability Puzzle, was published. So we're very much looking forward to hearing more on your book in the session. Alice, it's great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this last session, and kudos to everyone who's still here and actively listening.
Thank you very much. Well, we're very curious to now hear a bit on your impressions. I understand all of you have actually been with us for the entire day. Thanks so much for taking your time also. And I'm quite interested. If you think back, the title of our session is, or the title of our event is, Radical Change versus More of the Same. So the first question I'd like to start with to everyone is, how radical have we dared to be in this event so far? What were the most radical ideas that you took away with you? Markus, maybe we start with you.
I think what comes to my mind is the role of visionary leadership, regardless if it is a small startup or a family-owned business or a big listed company. So you always need visionary leaders to start a transformation.
All right, beautiful. Thank you so much. Fady, what was your kind of most catchy idea that you heard today?
For me, it was what Marie mentioned, Marie Langler, about who is making the decisions, right? Like, if we have a diverse problem, are we making sure that we have diverse solutions as well? And the idea that we have kind of production of who brings the idea, that the politicians agree on the ideas, and it works like in a very systematic way, and that we need to really reinvent that and make sure that we have the framework to allow diverse solutions, because the problem is not the same from every side of the world. And I think that was very clear in the chat as well, that we've seen like different perspectives from different parts of the world that highlighted that maybe we're not in agreement on that those are the most important or easy solutions for the problems that we have at the moment.
Thank you very much. Elise, what did you find?
Yeah, so there was obviously a lot, and I mean, I think I took 5 pages of notes. I mean, I'd like to start with Alexander van der Bellen, who already said, well, you know, he doesn't want to be preaching to the converted. So I think we need to be very aware, of course, that we are in a bubble, and maybe to many of us, not all that's been said has been fully radical. But the topics, of course, that we did mention, things like system change, paradigm shift. I don't know if that word actually was mentioned, but that is very, very radical. Social transformation is very radical. And in terms of the most radical idea that I heard today, I'd like to mention or come back to what Christoph Thun-Hohenstein said about needing fully transparent companies, because I think this is huge, this is big. We often forget that in the last 10 or so years, corporate power has just grown much more than you know, the power of nation states. And now we have loads of companies that are larger in terms of turnover, in terms of you know, staff, even than entire nation states. And so it's definitely there where we need to start. And so I think this transparency is a very, very big deal. And I do hope, so I think it's a radical idea, it's a big idea, it's very ambitious, and I really hope we can, it has my full support.
Great, thank you so much. I'm quite impressed because just like Alice, I made notes all over the place that you actually all managed to pick out one. Like, yeah, that was quite a good idea for me. So thanks a lot. I think that was interesting. You all had a different kind of idea that you picked, which in a way probably also relates somehow to your personal backgrounds. So Markus, you said visionary leaders was an idea that you quite liked. When we look at your story, you have been with VERBUND for the past 15 years. And you told me that at the beginning, renewable energies or sustainable were really not even a topic when you entered into VERBUND. But then things obviously changed quite a bit over the past 15 years. Can you take us through that transformation process, how that happened and what actually happened?
Yes, well, VERBUND always has been a renewable energy company, but we focused on one technology, hydropower. So it wasn't an easy start for the new renewable energy technologies, wind and solar PV. So it took some time that these additional technologies could grow within the company. That this has also to do with the culture in the company, and so it was quite. It took some years that these new technologies have been accepted as equal. So it needs the time for this change, and it is a lot of cultural change in the company needed.
So can you describe that cultural change a bit more? You mentioned the visionary leaders. Does that have something to do with the culture?
Absolutely. I think you need a visionary CEO and a management team who really pushes for this change. And I think in a listed company, it's also important that you have governance structures which allows the management team to also invest in new businesses, even if it is not sure if this will be a success and if there will be profits in the short term. So actually, I think it's also a question of a new governance.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned new governance and you mentioned that visionary leader. But then how can we really envision that? Maybe a lot of us here are not working in a big corporate. So if someone comes up with this new idea or this new kind of stream, let's now go more into sustainability, let's go into the direction of decarbonization. I mean, there must be a lot of resistance within the big corporate, right? How does the corporation deal with that?
We have established new subsidiaries which had the focus to look for new business opportunities, to be innovative, to work closely together with startups, for instance, and to develop this new business. So I think this was quite a good idea to help these small businesses to grow. So you need a kind of internal, let's say, accelerator to develop these businesses.
Mm-hmm. And 15 years is a long span of time. Also, a lot of things will happen that don't have to do with the corporate itself, but that might just be, something happening in society, something happening in the world. What kind of role does the environment play also when it comes to the willingness maybe to go into that direction?
Well, I think Ian mentioned the importance of the capital market or changes on the capital markets. Nowadays, it's very easy because everyone is looking for green or ESG investments. So this is quite a very important factor for the transformation, that now a lot of capital is available for these innovative green technologies, and this is a very big opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And I can imagine that's something that you also mentioned in the conversation I had with you previously, that also accidents like Fukushima might have quite an influence when it comes to actually changing your governance or changing the capital market, right?
Definitely. I think a lot of politicians and a lot of CEOs started to rethink the energy sector, and a lot things have changed in Europe since that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for giving us this first perspective from the side of a big corporate. Fady, if we now look at the world of data science, you also said that it's quite interesting, that we have this gut feeling as humans, but data science might be a bit more relatable, and they've actually become quite hip right now. So how radical is the influence in the transformation towards sustainability when we look at data science and machine learning?
So I guess we've been using machine learning and data science for basically, it's hype now. So we're trying to apply it everywhere. The issue with applying it in different parts, I mean, within the academic world or the business world, is that it's very resource intensive, right? So when we use a lot of like very hype and strong models that require a lot of energy, we kind of not see, like, yes, we're looking at the value we're going to get from what the AI can do, which definitely is going to be helping with sustainability in the future and predictive analysis and all of that. But the cost of developing and training those models, it's not something that we can ignore. And I think it's something that smaller businesses, medium businesses should also keep in mind. Like, what are we actually using AI and machine learning for? Because we could be trying to solve a small problem, but while we're training the models for it, we already have been we've not been sustainable, we've not been using the models in the best way possible. And it's on corporates and basically data scientists all over to try and be more efficient, streamline their systems. There are a lot of cloud-based solutions that try to offer a carbon neutral infrastructure, and it's something that we definitely need to work on more, even in smaller teams. We do that as well within my company, where we try to really only use machine learning and AI when it generates more value than it could require in resources, be it financial resources or also environmental resources in that matter.
So you're calling out for sustainable AI, right?
Correct. I mean, I think there's a lot of it's catching fire now, this topic that we're looking at, and most of the big suppliers of cloud hardware, like Amazon, Google, and the likes, they are actually putting it really with big letters in their cloud infrastructure, that they offer a zero carbon emission infrastructure. But it's also on us, like, we cannot also abuse it, because resources are still resources. They are not infinite, right? So still we need to make the right decisions when it comes to using AI and machine learning in the right place where we need it, and try to avoid using it everywhere simply because it's fancy and it gets us more funding as a startup or as a big company or a small team within a company as well. It's a fancy word.
I think it's quite interesting because probably a lot of people aren't quite aware of it, that also AI and data science can be not sustainable. So maybe can you just point it out to us again? What are really the aspects that make it not sustainable? It's the energy spending.
Yeah, it's basically like you think about AI, that in order for it to train, in order for an AI algorithm to learn what to do, it has to take a lot of data, and the more complex the problem is, the bigger the amount of data. And it has to go through it over and over and over again to understand and create some connections and patterns and find patterns within this data. So when we think of AI, it's not only the part where it starts running and making the decisions for us, it's the training part, it's the data acquisition part, it's the retraining part, because just like when we learn something, if things change in the data, then we have to relearn it again. So this pipeline is quite intensive. And we think that, like, in general, because of the hype, people think that it might be very easy to develop it. It's just like, really, the machine will learn and it will do what we want it to do. But it's not always the case. And if we start with a very ambiguous problem, thinking that AI can solve it, we might end up with no product, no successful algorithm, but only a lot of heat and carbon emission just from training, acquisition, and all of that.
Mm-hmm. I'm having a look at the chat where Supasi Rai, she also, or he, commented on what you just said, saying, in your opinion, who should then bear the cost of sustainable transformation, given that the cost of doing so is beyond many stakeholders? Do you have an opinion on that?
I can only give my intuition is that I think that right now we're kind of converging to the cloud based solutions. So it's less and less dependency on every corporate creating their own infrastructure and their own decision, that we're going now to a cloud-based solution. So if there is an answer, it will be probably with the people who are supplying this infrastructure, where they can educate and generate more streamlined processes, so you don't end up just testing every data set that you have, that you basically can easily find if this data set or if this problem is too ambiguous for starting even pipelining it and training for it, then you can say, okay, this is not worth it. Let's not waste energy on that and try to find something else that is more beneficial. And I think that takes us back to what was mentioned by Alex, I think, before, where the innovative solution that we're trying to find, be it AI, machine learning, or with plastics, it has to make both business sense, but also has to be sustainable. But they have to be together, and they don't have to be conflicting each other. So it's not like if I'm gonna train a machine learning algorithm, it doesn't have to be very cheap or basically resource like be sustainable or be efficient and good. It can be both. So just about how to find the innovative solution. And the same with the plastic question that we were discussing. It doesn't have, that's my opinion. It doesn't have to be either we use plastics only, we don't, and then we have a big problem. We can find a mid solution. I think there are a lot of smart people, not only here, but everywhere in every business, really, to find those very small like innovative and smart solutions, like simply what Bas and Marie also.
I'd love to start by linking in with what Fady just said, because I mean, obviously, when we talk about sustainability, there's also the social aspect, right? And I think it makes a lot of sense to focus on the environmental aspect. But then when it comes to training algorithms, etc., right? We know that it matters who trains them. Marie Ringler today mentioned that, you know, it's really important to consider who sets the rules, what do we define as success, etc., and who really has the power. And we know that algorithms aren't neutral, right? They are biased. They recognize Black faces more difficult. They have more difficulties in recognizing, you know, non-standard faces, so to speak, or faces of people that aren't, you know, among their programmers so much. And I think this is really important. So this social aspect of sustainability as well. And then I think cost is such an important thing. And by the way, just on the technology bit, I mean, we have an entire chapter on this. It's one of the puzzles in the book, puzzle pieces in the book. But the cost, to me, this is one key reason why we aren't yet where we are in terms of social transformation and radical change, because we keep talking about the costs of sustainability, of investing in sustainability, etc. But we completely forget or ignore rather that we are subsidizing fossil fuels big time. We are not calculating the cost of unsustainability. We are passing on the companies and others are passing on the cost to people further down the value chain. And I mean, there are studies that say that if you just take into account the cost of ill health due to air pollution, which happens to kill 20,000 people a day, so about 7 million a year, much more than COVID probably ever will, we would have paid for the investments necessary to stay below the 1.5 or 2 degrees Paris threshold. So I think really this cost argument is a really important one, which can also help us get elsewhere. But I mean, about the book, I mean, the main message is really to zoom out, to step outside our professional silos and bubbles, and to recognize that just because we have a hammer, the problem isn't necessarily a nail, right? So this is, I think, there's a good reason why our world has become very specialized and professionalized, but it blinds us, I think, to opportunities. And that doesn't mean that we don't need sort of these sort of very deep thinking and very sort of detailed solutions. But before we go there, we need to step out and look at this bigger picture, precisely to avoid creating more problems than we solve. I mean, just as one example, we know that electric mobility may be one, or is part of the solution when it comes to addressing climate change. But we also know that it matters where the power actually comes from, right? If it comes from fossil fuels, that's already not great. But then if you look at the lithium water extraction in already sort of drought-prone areas, Latin America, etc., I think unless we really consider all these bigger sort of issues, we risk creating more problems than we solve. And I think we need to also be aware that a lot of the global issues we're facing today are complex, right? They cannot be solved per se. They can be addressed. We can try to not make them worse, but we probably won't be able to solve them just like this. And so then, we identify, there's a co-author, Claudia Winkler, who's a sort of a business executive turned impact entrepreneur. And we defined 6 puzzle pieces. There's circular economy, climate action, social justice, but then technology as well, responsible consumption and sustainable business. And then at the end, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the things that we said today are also what we mentioned, and one of them is optimism. It's really this realization that it can still be done. If we act now, it can be done. And also to realize the world is actually much better than it was 50 or 100 years ago. Child mortality is down big time. Our environmental regulation is much better. So a lot has actually happened. And I think a lot of people, but particularly those that aren't yet among the converted, that aren't in this bubble, they need the positive, optimistic sort of can-do messages in order to not sort of be scared off. Yeah, I'll stop here. I'm very happy to talk more about this, but
I don't even think you have to stop here, but I'd like to bring Markus and Fady into the discussion as well. I think this has been a reoccurring theme today as well, complexity versus simplicity, which will help us to get closer to this transformation towards sustainability or be quicker, even though we already heard as well, it's not always about speed. So maybe it's about a slower transformation. But how do you perceive that? It's true that the world that we're living in is very complex, but do we have to break it down? Do we have to make it more simple? Or is it really about just living with the fact that everything is a bit complex? How do you think about that?
I think what is very important is also the acceptance by the society. In our sector, in the energy sector, for big infrastructure projects, you also need to convince the local people that we need renewable energy plants. It's like this, this not in my backyard attitude. If you would like to plan and build a big wind farm. So it was very interesting what Maria said about this example of Ursula Sladek in Germany. Ursula founded the first local electricity company. So this is also, I think, a very interesting approach to get the local people on board for this big infrastructure project. So I think it's very important to get this acceptance, because otherwise there's the danger that the transition will get stuck.
And what are your ideas on how can you get towards that acceptance? Because isn't that the big challenge?
Well, that's I don't think that there are easy solutions. A lot of I think stakeholder discussions and stakeholder involvement and is needed for this transition. And as always, there are people who are winning and people who are losing from that change. So you should be careful that this is a just transition, that no one is left behind, and this is a very important social dimension of the transition.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an important point. And so, sorry, Fady, I'll let you comment on that.
No, just wanted to add just one thing. Like, it's as much value as you can create for so many people or for so many stakeholders, then the better it is, of course. So in case of energy, and in case as well with the plastics solutions, is try to, if we can create more value to the end user, I'm getting a better product at a cheaper price, at a better service. And as a business, I am making more profit, and as and I'm being more sustainable. If we can, of course, like, this is the optimum solution. But of course, there are trade-offs, right? As if the trade-offs are not on the customer side, then we can definitely end up with more adoption behavior-wise. And I think Marie also mentioned that where before Corona, yes, it was a great idea, but they had a lot of buy-in, but not really an adoption. And then there was a need, and then it became a good service. And then it was like, okay, so I'm not losing anything. I'm satisfied as a customer, but I'm also doing it for a good cause and supporting the local farmers. So then there is really not much losses here. There are not many that are losing in such a great and smart idea.
Yeah, that's what Teresa also said about how difficult it is to change people's behavior if they are looking for convenience, and then maybe sustainability might not be the most convenient solution at first sight at the moment. I'd like to bring in a comment that I'm reading in the chat as well by Maya Fischoff, who's also from the Network for Business Sustainability. She said that it was also mentioned that we are in this kind of bubble in the sense of representing a group of the converted to sustainability. And you've also mentioned that as well. So she's curious how many of the radical and powerful statements today might resonate with people outside this pro-sustainability bubble. If decisions will ultimately be made by a group with many views, how does that range of views shape our potential future and potential for radical action? So kind of coming back also to this complexity versus simplicity, how can we come out of this bubble and just speak amongst all of us who are very pro, and we'll all get connected on LinkedIn hopefully afterwards and make sure that we exchange amongst us? How can we burst the bubble?
It's a very big one, but I'm very happy to start. I mean, I think it's partly, of course, we know that to think global and to not think of us as the center of attention, us as in, in the Western sort of rich world, but very much take into account the social aspects. And I think Markus just also spoke about the need to recognize a just transition. And I mean, also coming back to this point that sustainability is, so buying sustainable products is sometimes more expensive. I think that's true sometimes, and we can appeal to people's ethics and morals and all of that, and that will reach some people, but it won't reach everyone, which is why I think it's very important to come back to this costing in sort of true cost accounting and taking account of the social costs. Yeah, and that includes, and really globally, because climate change, biodiversity loss, none of these problems are problems that we can address by ourselves in the rich world, so to speak, right? But I also like to question a little bit this point on convenience, because for me, it's not convenient to have to go and buy a black shirt, as an example, 3 times a season, because it develops holes after 2 wears. That's not convenient. So for me, quality is convenient. And so it's really about buying what you love, right? And then it's also about, again, talking about perhaps people in developing countries. I mean, what comes to mind is the social plastic model, right? The plastic bank that remunerates people for collecting ocean plastic, or what would be ocean plastic, or garbage, plastic waste, and turn this into a livelihood for them, right? So really to look for these win-wins. And I think this will also make climate action, sustainability more palatable to many people, to really show people what's in it for them.
Mm-hmm. What do the others think about that? Can that become convenient?
Agree completely. Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, trying to find those win-win solutions, of course. And also, I wanted just to add one thing with the T-shirt example. Of course, I would go ahead and buy a quality T-shirt if I can afford it. Mm-hmm. But if I can't, then I'll go for the cheap solution, right?
Yeah, but then I have to buy 3 quality T-shirts, and I end up paying more, right? And having to pay for transport or whatever it is.
Correct, but the thing is that the model works only on the long term, when I can start already looking at the long term and realizing that, okay, if I am able to plan, I'll be able to of course, buy the high quality thing. And I think it gets us back a little bit to the discussion as well, of who, like the solutions that we're making, are they fit for the problems that we're trying to solve everywhere? Because I would go for the €1 less T-shirt because that's all the money I have, even if it's not sustainable, if it's not green. Because right now I need a T-shirt, so that's when the convenience hits in. Where in another part of the world or in another economic class, I have the luxury of making that decision. That's why I think what you mentioned, Alice, of the win-win, like where it makes sense on both ends, is very crucial. And it's hard. It's really, it sounds like a simple, but it's very hard to find those smart and win-wins entrepreneurial solutions that actually can get the VCs to buy in, can get you funding outside of the bubble we are in, and outside of the companies who are trying maybe to greenwash their investments. That really makes sense. It's just simply, look, I'm having a great idea. This is what I want to do. Makes sense for you. Invest in it. And by the by, it's great for sustainability because I designed it this way, or the entrepreneur designed it this way. And I think the many times came the question of how can we get, like, as students, learn the frameworks, or how can we teach students to be more social entrepreneurs? And I think that's crucial. I'm in the MBA program, and we study a lot of both worlds, like the business world and also being socially and as leaders or as managers socially responsible. And I think that's it. I'm not sure if like 10, 15 years ago it had the same space in the curriculum, but I think the more we do it, the better it is. And one thing more also is the art part and how can we change behavior. And I think I just wanted to circle back to that, if it's okay, Katharina, to go back to that, is art is great to change behavior without us noticing it. If there is something that cool, like, people will follow, people will be happy to do it because we've seen it. We see it a lot of times on a larger scale. You can change behavior and you can get people to be, we're all impressionable, right? We see something, we think about it. That's how marketing works. So, and I'm not saying here that we should have an agenda of like pushing, like, because it's art is free, right? But if we empower more art that includes this aspect of the environment, it will naturally happen. Might not be radical, but it will take time. But we'll reach a point where we kind of converge, where we get the win-win solutions, but also we are naturally inclined to choose the one T-shirt that is more expensive than the 3 cheap T-shirts, because we think it's the right thing. It's the cool thing to do. Let's put it this way.
I'm a bit skeptical that behavioral change would be enough. I think we also need political targets, and we need the regulatory framework. So I think especially for the economy to change, it really needs this new directives and laws, and really appreciate what is going on in the European Union at the moment with the so-called European Green Deal, and the target that Europe becomes the first carbon neutral continent or a business area. So I think it's really important that you really have also strict rules, and that really the players in the market are forced to change the behavior.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I couldn't agree more on the regulation aspect. I think this is really, really, it's absolutely key. I mean, in terms of creating a level playing field, it's what companies ask for. And I think, and I love the point about art being sort of a subtle way of changing people's mindsets, because that really is what is necessary. Obviously, education has a really important part to play, and I would even say early childhood education, not just university education, right? I mean, the recent Dasgupta review in the UK argued that every university student should mandatorily follow one course on basic ecology. And I would even argue, we need to start in kindergarten, and go really sort of to understand why we depend on nature, and that it's not the planet that needs saving, but that it's us and our continued health, wealth, and well-being that we want to maintain, right? I mean, the planet doesn't care, but apparently human civilizations have an expiry time period of about 336 years. Someone calculated that. And, we're pretty close to that, and we don't even have to get there. But I think in linking back with nature and understanding the value of the services, also to use business language here again, to make this, I think, resonate with some people is really, really helpful, right? The ecosystem service that we talk about, like the regulating, water clearing, climate regulation, etc. services, providing medicines, food, etc. I think this is really key. And I'd like to then also come back to the very sensitive they versus us argument, right? Because we definitely don't want to. I mean, this is very big and very difficult, but I do think it's a fact that we can learn a lot from people that have much less luxurious lives than we do. And we can also learn a lot from previous generations. I mean, a couple of generations ago, it was normal to, bring your plastic bag to the supermarket, or to recycle containers, or to, use food leftovers. And in a way, I mean, it's like by not doing that anymore, some people would say it's convenient, but I think we're actually digging our own graves if we're not careful. Sorry to be a bit drastic here, but that's how I feel.
Calling for radical, so I think it's okay to be drastic. I get the feeling this is what's needed. Markus, I have to ask you, as both Fady and Alice mentioned arts now, and that art could play a role also when it comes together with business. And we spoke about that in the very first conversation today. So now you said it's not so much about behavioral change, but more about politics and regulations. But can you imagine that arts would have an added value also when it comes into your business, for instance?
Of course, Christoph mentioned Olafur Eliasson in the beginning, and VERBUND has an art installation at its headquarters in Vienna. It's called the Yellow Fog. So I think this plays a major role, and it supports this rethinking process, the way we look at things, and so of course this plays a role, and is very important.
Thank you. So now we also know about the RT side of VERBUND, which I think is valuable. I'm just looking at the chat to see that if I'm not missing any questions. Ahmed Fahmy said, art is very powerful. Can it address and reach the whole population to be targeted? Does anyone want to comment on that? And everyone, now it's all back to arts again. Now we're talking about arts and business here. Daniela also said, art shifts your perspective. We just don't use it enough in business schools. All right. We already spoke about this as well, the skills that we need in business schools. as we already kind of wrapping it up a bit, I'm interested in two things. One is, we spoke a lot about how optimistic we are or we can be. And the question is really, how radical do we have to be now in what we do? And also coming from your perspectives in making sure that we're really driving this transformation forward here. And then maybe the second question would also be, when we kind of go back from this big perspective to the very small scale, what is it that we can do on an individual level? And what is it that maybe you also do on an individual level? So I'm posing those two last questions to each one of you.
Okay, well, maybe I start. I think what I liked was when Axel mentioned this partnership for sustainable packaging in Austria. So I think it's very important that we establish networks, that we collaborate more, that big companies and startups work together, that also we cooperate with NGOs and so on. So I think this is the single most important thing, that we need to think bigger, and no one can find the solutions alone. So we need to team up, and I think then a lot can be achieved, and radically change and transformation is possible. So
radical collaboration it is. And Markus, what is it that you as a person, as an individual, is there something that you do or that you can share that maybe others can learn from? Or in your work environment?
Well, I think what my job description makes special is that you have to look into every single part of a company, and you need to learn to think in a horizontal way. So we have so many experts today, but all these experts need to learn to speak a common language. So this is what I try to do, that I try to bring together different experts from different fields, and to work on together on challenges. So I think this is important, that to break up these silos, and to learn to better understand each other technical fields.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I love it how the vision that you have of more radical collaboration is also something that you're trying to reach on a personal level. Thank you so much. Fady, what about you? I think you also said that we're not radical enough, and we actually have to be more radical. What is it? Where? Radical?
I think that there's, like as mentioned as well in the introduction by the president as well, was there's no way not to do it. There's the only way we can. So if we don't do radical, no one can predict what would happen, but it's definitely not going to be, and for many businesses and for us. So it's we have to be radical. It's not a choice. It's kind of a must. And how to do it, I view it from a very practical perspective, and how can I do, like in my micro environment, and I always try, as you might have seen, that this is like general arc and my ideology is to find those win-win situations where I can deliver both, even if the business has some goals, but they're not really going to make it and trickle down to every level. And we have to really, every manager and every level have to find those win-win situations where I can, if I'm presenting a business case or trying to find a solution to a problem, how can I make it sustainable? And I think that's something that I try to push if it's possible. I mean, I'm trying, but it's not always an easy solution to align that with the business goals. But I think it's kind of a skill. You keep doing it and learning it, and it becomes easier with time. Maybe it's something we should study on its own in the MBA or in the business schools. But yeah, basically that, try to find the win-win situations. How can I be sustainable or allow others or empower others to be more sustainable in their, even if their daily life or business life, while delivering value to the business as well.
Thank you. Elise, you've got the final word.
Wow. Well, I think we absolutely must be radical, and radical as we can be. but we also must be very careful not to lose people, right? I think we really, in German, we say to pick people up where they are. So I think the worst we can do is to make people feel bad because they're still eating meat or because they're, you know, going and buying, you know, too many low quality products online. I think this is very sensitive. And someone just mentioned spirituality in the chat. I think psychology is a topic we didn't talk about a lot today, but which I think is hugely important. So yes, by all means, we have to be radical. And I think there is a risk that we focus too much on resilience and adaptation and things like that, right? These are key terms that keep coming up in the context of sustainability, and they are important. But the idea is not to install more water sprinklers, but to, you know, stop soil sealing, right? Or to actually undo it. So I think, and so in the end, it's about breaking up these entrenched structures and incentive systems, which are partly not very transparent. And I think some people don't know that, you know, even the sort of carbon footprint of universities isn't counted in many countries, including Austria, in the nationally determined contribution. So I think all of this actually requires a lot of, being radical, even if you perhaps should call it something else. I don't know.
Thank you so much. I think that is a beautiful question to pose at the very end. Maybe we should call radical differently because we've been talking about it so much. But then again, as we know, there might be different solutions, and there are always for sure more questions, and hopefully at some point also some answers. Thank you so much for this beautiful panel. Thank you also for paying so much referencing so much to what's been said in the other sessions by the other speakers and still bringing in your own perspective. Thank you very much, Markus. Thank you, Fady. Thank you, Alice, for this beautiful wrap up.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome.
And with this, we have reached the final end, basically, and the wrap up that is just for me to do what we have experienced. And of course, we will also have a glimpse at what Markus has drawn. So basically, at the beginning, we had a lot of motivation, optimism, hopes. Looking back at the welcoming speakers, there was already this kind of passion that this topic really concerns all of us. We heard quite often today that we really have to look out for different solutions. And then in the end, we might just take one of them, but it's important to have this diversity of approaches and of perspectives. I think it was beautiful that we also heard a lot of personal stories today and sharing what this really does to us as human beings, because in the end, it is all about us and how we can change and actually make sure that we move in the right direction together. And I think at the end, it was beautifully summed up by our final speakers, what kind of radical changes they are looking for, radical collaboration, win-win situations, and not leaving anyone behind or not leaving anyone out. If we look at all these, in a way, what they all have in common is that this will only work if we're in it together. So when we talk about sustainability, of course, it is all about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And SDG number 17 is cooperation and collaboration of all of us to make sure that we actually manage to reach the 16 other SDGs. So I think that was beautifully summed up also by our final speakers, that in the end, we have to be in this together to make it work.